The city's most awaited night had arrived, the annual charity gala, held at the Grand Orion Hotel. The ballroom looked like a palace. Golden chandeliers sparkled above, waiters in white gloves moved gracefully, and the guests wore gowns and tuxedos worth fortunes. Cameras flashed as the wealthiest families arrived, each one trying to outshine the other. But in the midst of all this glitter and power, a very different figure stood at the doorway. Her name was Anna. Anna wasn't dressed in silk or jewels. She wore a simple, neatly pressed dress that had been stitched and restitched many times. In her hands, she carried a small basket filled with delicate, handmade flower brooches. Each one was crafted with love, tiny details sewn carefully by her roughened fingers. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to compete. She had been given a rare chance to sell her handmade flowers during the gala, with part of the proceeds going to charity. For Anna, this was more than just a night. It was hope that she could earn enough to pay her rent, buy medicine for her ailing mother, and maybe save a little for herself. As she stepped into the ballroom, she immediately felt hundreds of eyes on her. The whispers began instantly. Who invited her? She doesn't belong here. Look at those cheap flowers. Pathetic. Anna's heart pounded, but she kept her head down and walked softly, each step careful. She had lived her entire life being looked down upon, but tonight she prayed for kindness. With a gentle voice, she approached a small group of women. "Good evening. Would you like to see these handmade flowers? They are for charity." The women barely glanced at her before turning away with mocking laughter. Anna forced a smile and moved on. She kept trying, one guess after another, each rejection cutting a little deeper. And then, as she turned toward the center of the hall, her path crossed with a woman who would change everything. The woman who now stood before Anna was impossible to miss. Her presence demanded attention. Her gown shimmered in silver sequins, her neck and wrists dripped with diamonds, and her hair was styled to perfection. She was Veronica Langston, wife of one of the wealthiest men in the country. People always whispered about Veronica. Some admired her beauty, others feared her temper, but all agreed. She carried herself as if the world belonged to her. Veronica's sharp eyes narrowed when they landed on Anna's basket of handmade flowers. Her lips curled in disgust as she took a slow step forward. "And what?" Veronica's voice rang out loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Is this embarrassment doing here?" Anna froze. Her hands tightened around the basket. She opened her mouth to explain, but words stuck in her throat. Veronica sneered, circling Anna like a predator. "These little trinkets? Do you think anyone here wants such cheap rubbish?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some tried to hide their smirks, others whispered behind their hands. Anna's cheeks burned red, but she whispered softly, almost pleading, "Madam, these flowers, they're for charity. I made them myself." The words only fueled Veronica's cruelty. She tilted her head back and laughed coldly. For charity or for pity? Pathetic. Before Anna could step back, Veronica leaned closer, her eyes filled with contempt, and in front of everyone, she spat directly on Anna's face. The sound of shock filled the ballroom. Some gasped, others turned away uncomfortably, and a few even chuckled at the humiliation. Anna stood frozen. Her heart hammered inside her chest, her vision blurred with tears, but she did not scream. Slowly, with trembling hands, she wiped her face. She looked down at her flowers, the little pieces of her hard work now trembling in her basket. Her silence only made the moment heavier. It was as if the entire hall was waiting to see what she would do next, or if anyone would dare to stand up for her. And then, the heavy doors of the ballroom opened once more. The grand ballroom door swung open with a sudden force, and the chatter instantly died down. All heads turned toward the entrance. A tall figure stepped inside. His presence was commanding. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black suit, polished shoes echoed with each step, and eyes sharp as steel. It was Edward Langston, the billionaire, husband of Veronica, owner of empires that stretched across continents. A man both admired and feared, whose single word could make or break fortunes. The air in the ballroom shifted. Guests straightened their posture. Whispers rushed through the hall. "It's him. Edward Langston is here." Veronica's expression flickered for a moment. Panic? Guilt? She quickly masked it with her usual arrogance and adjusted her diamond necklace, trying to appear composed. Edward's gaze swept across the room like a storm, and then it landed on Anna. The sight of her, standing small, trembling, her face wet with humiliation, made his eyes darken. He noticed the basket in her hands, the delicate flowers, the silent tears clinging to her lashes. And then his eyes shifted to his wife. The silence was suffocating. Every guest held their breath, waiting. Everyone expected him to laugh it off, or worse, to defend his wife. After all, wasn't she the powerful, untouchable Veronica Langston? Edward moved forward. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, echoing against the marble floor. Each one felt heavier than the last, until he stopped, not beside his wife, but directly in front of Anna. Anna blinked in confusion. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Then, in front of the entire hall, Edward reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a folded white silk handkerchief, and, gently, with respect, he wiped the spit from Anna's face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Veronica's smile froze, her face paling. And then Edward spoke, his voice deep, steady, carrying across the ballroom. "I am sorry," he said, looking directly into Anna's eyes. "No one deserved to be treated this way, especially not by someone who carries my name." The entire hall erupted into whispers, shock spreading like wildfire. For the first time that night, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew something unforgettable was about to unfold. The ballroom was so silent now that even the soft notes of the orchestra had faded into nothing. Every eye was fixed on Edward Langston, the billionaire who had just wiped the humiliation from Anna's face. Anna stood frozen, clutching her basket tighter, her breath shallow. She couldn't understand why this powerful man would show her such kindness. But everyone else was staring at one person, Veronica. Her cheeks flushed crimson, her lips trembled as she tried to force out a laugh. "Darling," she began, her voice shaking. It was nothing, just a silly. Edward's hand lifted sharply, silencing her. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Nothing," he said, his tone cold. "You call spitting on an innocent woman nothing." A shiver ran through the crowd. No one had ever dared to speak to Veronica like this, especially not her husband. Veronica's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the faces of the guests were unreadable. She tried again, her words rushed, desperate. "She doesn't belong here. Edward, look at her, her dress, those cheap flowers. People like her ruin the image of—" "Enough!" Edward's voice thundered across the hall. His piercing gaze locked onto her, and for the first time, Veronica felt small. He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "Do you believe wealth gives you the right to crush others? Do you think diamonds on your neck make you greater than the woman you just humiliated?" Veronica's hands shook. She had ruled over social circles with arrogance for years, but now, under Edward's eyes, she felt exposed. The guests stood in stunned silence. Some glanced at Anna, some at Edward, but no one dared to move. The entire hall felt like a courtroom, and Edward was the judge delivering his verdict. Finally, he spoke again, his voice deep, commanding. "Veronica, tonight you have disgraced yourself. You have disgraced my name. And for that, you will answer." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Everyone knew something monumental was about to happen. Veronica's painted smile had completely vanished. Her hand clutched the sides of a sparkling gown as Edward's words echoed through the ballroom. The crowd waited, breathless. Everyone knew Edward Langston was a man who never spoke in vain. If he declared punishment, it would be swift and unforgettable. Edward took a deep breath, his jaw tight. He pointed at the diamond necklace glittering around Veronica's throat. "Take it off." Veronica's eyes widened. "Wear what?" she stammered, her voice breaking. "You heard me," Edward said firmly, his tone unshakable. "Take off those diamonds you wear with such pride. They don't belong to someone who carries no respect for others." The ballroom gasped. Some women covered their mouths. Others exchanged shocked looks. Veronica's pride had always been in her wealth, her jewels, her status. And now, in front of the entire city's elite, her husband was stripping it away. Veronica's lips trembled as she reached for the clasp of the necklace. "Edward, please, don't do this. Not here. Not in front of—" "Exactly here. Exactly in front of them," Edward interrupted sharply. Let them all see what arrogance and cruelty lead to. Hands shaking, Veronica unclasped the necklace. The diamonds sparkled one last time under the chandelier before she reluctantly placed them into Edward's palm. He turned, without hesitation, and handed the necklace to Anna. "These jewels mean nothing," Edward said, his voice steady but loud enough for all to hear. "But tonight they will serve as an apology to you." Anna's eyes widened. She shook her head, stepping back. "No, I can't accept this. I don't want her wealth. Her voice faltered as tears welled up. "I just wanted to be treated with respect." Edward looked at her with admiration, then faced the crowd. "Do you hear her? She asks not for riches, but for dignity. And yet, how many of you stood silent when she was insulted?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, guilt creeping into their expressions. No one dared to speak. Veronica's face was pale, her pride shattered. For the first time in years, she was the one being humiliated, while the simple woman she had spat on now stood tall in the eyes of everyone. The air was heavy, charged with emotion. Everyone knew the night was far from over. Edward had only just begun. The ballroom buzzed with restless whispers. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Veronica Langston, the woman who ruled every party, every gathering with her arrogance, was now trembling, stripped of her pride, while a simple woman stood as the center of everyone's attention. Edward's voice rose again, cutting through the murmurs. "Veronica, tonight you spat on more than just a woman's face. You spat on humility. You spat on kindness. And worst of all, you spat on the very values this gala was meant to honor." His words struck like thunder. Guests lowered their heads, ashamed, for they too had remained silent during the cruelty. Veronica tried to defend herself, her voice sharp with desperation. "Edward, please, you're humiliating me. I only wanted to keep this event respectable. She doesn't belong here. Look at her." Edward turned on her, his eyes blazing. "No, Veronica, it is you who doesn't belong here tonight. A woman who cannot respect the dignity of others has no place in a hall meant for charity and compassion." Gasps spread across the room. Some nodded in agreement, others dared not breathe. Edward gestured toward the exit. "Leave this hall. Now." Veronica's face went white. "You cannot mean this. Edward, I'm your wife." Edward's jaw tightened. His voice was calm, but firm. "A wife in name only. Until you learn respect, you will not stand by my side." For the first time, Veronica's eyes filled with tears. The guards at the back of the hall stepped forward, waiting for Edward's signal. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would come to her defense. But the same guests who once bowed at her feet now looked away, unwilling to save her. Slowly, humiliated and broken, Veronica clutched her gown and began walking toward the doors. Each step echoed louder than the last, a cruel reminder that her reign of arrogance had ended. Anna stood silently, her basket still trembling in her hands. She could hardly believe what was happening before her eyes. She had entered this hall feeling small, invisible, yet now the richest man in the city had turned the entire room upside down for her. As Veronica disappeared through the doors, Edward turned back toward Anna. His expression softened. "Now," he said gently, "it is time this hall learned the meaning of true worth." The crowd leaned forward, eager, nervous. They all sensed something unforgettable was about to happen. The ballroom still buzzed with the echoes of Veronica's disgrace. Guests whispered among themselves, but their eyes never left Edward and Anna. The man who commanded empires now stood beside a woman in a plain, worn dress, holding a basket of fragile handmade flowers. Edward gently took the basket from Anna's trembling hands. He lifted one flower brooch and held it high for the crowd to see. "Do you see this?" His voice boomed, calm yet powerful. "A delicate piece of art, made with care, with patience, with love. Something no amount of wealth can buy, because it carries the touch of a heart." The guests shifted uncomfortably, many looking ashamed. They remembered how they had mocked Anna, how they had whispered cruelly. Edward continued, his words like fire and ice. "You laughed at her. You ignored her. You let cruelty silence your conscience. Yet she, standing alone, humiliated, chose dignity over anger. Tell me, who among you is truly rich tonight?" The crowd lowered their heads. The silence was crushing. Then Edward did something no one expected. He reached into his coat, pulled out a checkbook, and began to write. With a firm stroke of his pen, he signed a figure so enormous that even the wealthiest men in the room would have gasped. He placed the check into Anna's basket. "This," he declared, "is the price of every flower you hold. And I promise you, your wake, your dignity, will never be ignored again." Anna's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, whispering, "Sir, this is too much. I never asked for money. I only wanted," her voice broke, "to be seen as human." Edward's gaze softened. He placed a reassuring hand over hers. "And tonight, the world will see you." The guests, unable to remain silent any longer, erupted into applause. Some clapped hesitantly, others with genuine admiration, but together the sound swelled until it shook the walls of the ballroom. For the first time in her life, Anna felt her presence mattered. She wasn't invisible anymore. Edward looked at the crowd, his voice steady and commanding. "Let this night be remembered, not for wealth, not for jewels, not for arrogance, but for the moment when a simple woman taught us all the meaning of respect." The applause grew louder, echoing like thunder, until Anna felt the entire hall stand with her. But deep inside, she wondered, was this only the beginning of a change, or the start of a storm that would shake more than just one night? The thunder of applause still shook the chandelier lights above. Some guests clapped out of guilt, some out of admiration, but all knew they had witnessed a moment that would not be forgotten. Anna stood trembling, her basket heavy not with flowers anymore, but with the weight of something far greater, dignity restored. Her heart raced. For years she had lived unseen, overlooked, and now the richest man in the city had placed her at the very center of the night. But what happened inside the ballroom didn't stay there. Dozens of journalists had gathered outside the Grand Orion Hotel, waiting to photograph gowns and diamonds. Instead, when the doors opened, they were met with a far greater story. Guests poured out, their voices buzzing, their eyes wide as they retold the incident again and again. It was unbelievable. Edward Langston himself sided with a poor woman. You should have seen his wife's face. He said respect is worth more than wealth. Imagine that. The whisper spread like wildfire. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and within hours the story had reached the front pages of newspapers and the top headlines online. Billionaire shames wife, defends simple woman at gala. Respect over riches. The night Edward Langston changed society. For Anna, it was overwhelming. She had only wanted to sell a few flowers to pay for her mother's medicine. Now, her name was being spoken in every corner of the city. Yet Anna did not feel pride. She felt something else, fear and uncertainty. What will this bring? She whispered to herself as she sat quietly in her small room later that night, her basket beside her. Will people mock me more? Or has my life really changed? Meanwhile, in a penthouse high above the city, Edward Langston stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. His decision tonight had shaken not just his marriage, but the very image of his empire. And Veronica, locked away in her private chamber, her face streaked with tears, was plotting. Humiliated, stripped of her pride, she whispered to herself, "This isn't over. I will make her regret ever crossing my path." The gala had ended, but the storm it had unleashed was only beginning. The city had not stopped talking since that night at the Grand Orion Hotel. Newspapers praised Edward's courage, talk shows debated about dignity versus wealth, and social media overflowed with Anna's picture, her simple dress, her tearful eyes, her basket of handmade flowers. Some called her a symbol of hope and humility. Others mocked her, accusing her of seeking pity. But either way, Anna's name was on everyone's lips. For Anna, life had become strange. Neighbors who once ignored her now greeted her with smiles. Strangers stopped her on the street, offering to buy her flowers at 10 times the price. It was overwhelming, a world she had never known. But in another part of the city, inside the towering Langston estate, a very different storm brewed. Veronica sat before her mirror, her diamond necklace gone, her pride shattered. The reflection staring back at her no longer looked like the untouchable queen she once was. It looked like a woman consumed with rage. Her fingers dug into the velvet armrest as she hissed to herself. She humiliated me. That little nobody. She dared to take my place in the eyes of the world. Her mind replayed the scene over and over, Edward wiping Anna's face, the applause, the whispers of the crowd. Each memory burned like fire in her chest. "No," Veronica whispered, her voice cold. "This isn't finished. Edward may think he can shame me, but I will show him. I will show them all." She called for her assistant, a young man who had always obeyed her commands. He entered nervously, sensing the storm in her eyes. "Find her," Veronica ordered. "Madam." "The girl, Anna. Find out where she lives, who she loves, what she fears. Bring me everything." The assistant hesitated. "But, Mrs. Langston, the press sees her as a hero. If—" Veronica's hand slammed against the table, rattling the perfume bottles. "Do as I say," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "Heroes fall, and I will be the one to break her." As the assistant hurried out, Veronica leaned back in her chair, a cool smile curling across her lips. Meanwhile, in her small home, Anna sat beside her mother, gently feeding her soup. She had no idea that beyond her fragile peace, a shadow had already begun to creep into her life, a shadow that would soon test her courage more than ever before. Days passed since the gala, but the city's fascination with Anna only grew stronger. Orders for her handmade flowers poured in. Local boutiques wanted to stock them, and charities reached out, hoping she would partner with them. For the first time in her life, Anna felt a small ray of stability. Each evening, she returned to her mother's home and sat with her mother, whose health was slowly improving with the medicines Anna could now afford. For Anna, this new life wasn't about fame or money. It was about survival and dignity. But far away, Veronica watched every headline with burning hatred. Every smile on Anna's face felt like salt in her wounds. One morning, Anna woke to a sharp knock at her door. She opened it to find two stern-faced men in black suits. "Anna Taylor," one asked. "Yes," she replied nervously. "You are being investigated for fraud," the man said coldly, handing her a letter. Anna froze. Fraud? There must be a mistake." But the men didn't listen. They stepped inside, searching her tiny home, opening drawers, overturning her basket of flowers. Anna stood helpless, tears forming in her eyes. By the time they left, the street outside was filled with curious neighbors whispering, "Fraud! Did she trick the billionaire?" I knew it was too good to be true. Anna clutched the letter with shaking hands. It accused her of pretending to be a poor woman for sympathy, claiming she had secretly taken money from wealthy donors for years. Every word was a lie, but it was stamped with official seals. That night, Anna cried silently beside her mother's bed. "Why? Why is this happening?" she whispered. And in her grand mansion, Veronica sipped her wine, a satisfied smile on her lips. Let's see how long the world worships their little angel once her name is dragged through the mud. But Veronica underestimated one thing. Edward Langston's sharp eyes had begun to notice her sudden calmness, her strange smile, and the movements of her loyal assistant. The game of revenge had begun, but it was far from one-sided. The world that had once praised Anna now turned against her. Newspapers carried cruel headlines. Fraud or innocence. The truth behind Anna Taylor. Social media burned with doubts, and orders for her flowers stopped overnight. Anna walked the streets with lowered eyes, hearing whispers and laughter follow her. Her mother, though weak, tried to comfort her. "Don't cry. My child, truth always finds a way." But Anna's heart was breaking. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide. And then, one evening, there was a knock at her door. When Anna opened it, she saw Edward Langston standing there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his eyes burning with both sorrow and determination. "Anna," he said gently, "may I come in?" Inside her tiny living room, Anna finally broke down. "Mr. Langston, I swear I've never cheated anyone. They are lies, all lies. But the world, they won't believe me." Edward knelt before her, his voice steady. "Anna, look at me. I believe you, and I will prove the truth to the world." That very week, Edward used his influence to launch an independent investigation. His lawyers dug deep, tracing every accusation back to one source, Veronica. Documents, recordings, and testimonies revealed her web of deceit. The city was shocked. The truth spread like wildfire. The fraud charges were false. Anna was innocent, and Veronica had orchestrated it all out of jealousy. At the next grand gathering, Edward invited Anna to stand by his side. As the lights glittered and cameras flashed, Edward's voice rang across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I stand with a woman who has been tested by cruelty but has stood taller than those who tried to break her. Anna Taylor is no fraud. She is a symbol of resilience, dignity, and truth." The hall erupted in applause. Some cried, others bowed their heads in shame for doubting her. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Edward turned to Anna, took her trembling hands, and said, "You may have come here with simple flowers, Anna, but you've given us something far greater, hope. And as long as I breathe, no one will ever dare spit on your dignity again." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of pain, they were of strength. Veronica, standing in the shadows, could do nothing as the crowd's respect shifted forever. Her empire of pride had crumbled, and for Anna, life would never be the same. She had walked into the ballroom as a nobody, but she left it as a woman the world would never forget.